Hello, and welcome back to Living Ad Majorum, an Ignatian Educator podcast. JP and I are so excited to bring you our two guests today from Loyola High Los Angeles, Ann Holmquist and Bob Stephan. Ann currently serves as the Vice President for Mission, alongside Bob, who serves as the Director of Mission. Both Ann and Bob have a long history working in Catholic education and are passionate about furthering the mission of Jesuit schools. Today, they come on the podcast to bring us into the experience of the recent LA fires. Our conversation is incredible and really useful for all of us who are navigating challenging times right now. Before we share with you our conversation with Ann and Bob, JP and I catch up on each other's semester and chat about quite a few things, including the health of Pope Francis, which at the time of the final editing of this recording is still uncertain. So let's dive in. I know you're going to love this episode as much as we do. Man, I could have had
Are you
this.
going to Cloakium, by the way? Are you signed up for?
I am.
Yeah.
Are you?
Right now, no, but there have
Mm.
been some changes that might work. So about a month ago, I got appointed as the PACE person in Canada. So that has kind of changed that.
Congratulations.
To be honest with you, I didn't even know much about it. I found out like 7 days before it happened. I didn't, you don't apply, right? Like
Right,
I
right.
just was like the provincial called and was like, okay, here's the deal. This is what's happening. But you can't leave your current job. So you're
Oh,
like,
you have to do both.
have to do both. So that hasn't helped the situation in terms of chaos. But yeah, I
Will
don't
that
see,
be true next year too?
yeah,
You stay in both. Canada's fun.
yeah, it's great. We're not the States. We don't have the money for anything. So it's everybody just does everything and that's the way it goes. It's not the US.
It's the good
For
Catholic
sure.
way. It's the good
Yeah, you
Catholic
just keep
way.
dumping things on people until they're ready to say no or quit. That's basically it. So it's strange because there's not many schools in Canada, right?
hmm
Four or five, whatever. But it is weird because now technically my bosses, like I report to my bosses who also report to me, which is very strange.
Yeah, that is
It's a bit of a
interesting.
strange dynamic. But yeah,
hmm
it's very different. Like the pace people here are not, it's not seen the same way as it is in the States.
hmm
You guys there, they're really, they run things over there, right?
Well,
Like,
they certainly make annual visits to the school and provide support through things like
yeah,
conferences and retreats
sure,
and
sure.
and run
So
sponsorship reviews and things like that.
yeah, so basically I'd be running sponsorship reviews and would do a school visit, but that's 3 visits, right?
hmm
In reality. So, but they don't see it the same way. They don't have the same hierarchical approach
hmm
here. The schools in Canada pretty much are independent,
hmm
and the programming they do is through the United States regions.
Okay.
Canadian schools go to either the eastern ones or the Midwest ones, depending where they are in Canada.
hmm
So hasn't hasn't changed much in that sense.
I can't imagine why you're so busy. I really can't.
Yes, exactly. On top of, kicking all the kids out of school and on top of all those things, this
So for
added,
your 2 week break, you get to do work.
yeah, the first week I'm going to do nothing. I don't think I'll do
That's
anything the
good.
first week, and the second week I'll try to make
Yeah.
sure I'm not completely overwhelmed.
Yeah.
How about you? Everything's okay?
Yeah, we're entering into a busy season. I think there's 7 different retreats between now and April
You guys
16th.
don't have a spring break coming up or something?
We do, we
Okay.
do. And I am such a good parent that I looked at my kids' schedule 2 days ago and realized that I do not have spring break with my kids this year. So it'll be very
Great.
interesting in our house.
When is yours?
Not next week, but the week after. So
Okay.
first week of March,
And when's theirs?
the week after that.
Okay.
Yeah,
Easy to
yeah,
manage.
yeah. But anyway, as you're looking at February, last day of February today,
Yeah.
um, How are you feeling right now? I know you just discussed having multiple hats you're wearing and adding more every day, but like what are some of the graces and challenges for you right now?
Grace is obviously it's an exciting position to be in, to know that there's something new to look forward to. Obviously, the concept of change and growth is nice. Like in it, for me at least, that part of it is enjoyable, knowing that on a day-to-day basis, the work that I would be doing would be very different. And that was already kind of the case, but this this makes that even more exciting in that I get to work with colleagues now, even outside of my own walls at Loyola, which is a really exciting thing to be able to visit some of the other schools in our country and see what they're doing, see the great work that they're doing with their students and their staff. That part excites me for sure. I've actually, despite being given this role, I don't know a lot of our colleagues in our own country as much as I know colleagues in the States,
Mm.
which is strange. We've talked about this before, but the Jesuit schools in Canada are so far apart that they often feel siloed. So uh, this will kind of hopefully make this feel like a smaller network for me in Canada. I'm excited about that aspect. That to me is a huge grace. And even there's a grace just being able to have an opportunity like this. I mean, I can't take that for granted. To be asked to do something like this for me is a huge opportunity, but it's also making sure that I remain grateful for the fact that someone has asked me to do this, and that I feel called to it for sure. I feel fortunate, and I have to make sure that I keep that in mind, despite the busyness. We've talked about this before. You can get caught up in that, but just being grateful for the opportunity to do this work for me is very, very important. How about you? Where are you at?
Yeah, I think I am really enjoying conversations with both colleagues I have right here, but also colleagues throughout the network, talking about, I have had several conversations with different campus ministers about their retreat programs and a couple other mission formation officers about as they try to design their 5-year program or reflect on their existing 5-year program. And so I love those conversations. I could have them all the time. And I'm glad that there are people willing to have them with me because the people in my life that, like my husband, my children, some of my colleagues who don't like having these conversations all the time, it's good to have
Yeah,
a network of people to do that with.
sure.
Moving into the Lenten season, I signed up for a course because I need more things to do, but a course through BC's Crossroads program, and it was $60 to sign on and have kind of an intentional engagement with the readings week by week in the Lenten season, and then have some dialogue and discussion on some discussion boards. Last Lent, wrote a series on the Sunday readings for the Central Southern Province. And so I was deeply invested in the Sunday readings. And so this year I was like, how can I retain that deep investment and also interact with people who are from different walks of life, different places. Some are from different countries, and have those conversations. So just opened it up yesterday. And so I'm looking forward to engaging in
Well, all
that.
that, and not to mention that you also have your walking challenge that you're doing.
Yeah. The thing my twins keep me activated in. Yeah, I just completed February yesterday. I average of 25 minutes outside a day.
That's
Though
pretty
in
good.
Texas, that's gonna be really terrible from June to September. So I am
Well, I
not gonna
never go
like
outside.
those.
I keep it indoors, never go
Yeah.
anywhere. I just put on workout clothes and sit at my desk. I was telling a colleague this yesterday, who walked by and was like, "Wow, it's great that you're working out after school." And I said, "I'm not. I just put these on and then I sit at my desk." So it appears that I'm doing any type of physical activity, but nothing ever actually gets done.
Well, and it's
That's
not a
more my
standing
speed.
desk, right? It's not a standing desk. You don't have like a little
No.
treadmill under there. You're just sitting.
Zero
Awesome.
physical activity that is happening.
That's really going to help you with all these hats you're wearing right now, too.
Absolutely. As my arteries slowly start to clog.
Good thing you're young. Good thing you're young.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I don't know how much longer I'll feel that much younger. Maybe I should do that. Maybe that's something I should look into for Lent. is like you, finding some way to be a little bit healthier in my lifestyle. That's something I probably need to look into.
What I found is particularly in the winter, I stay inside. So, like challenging myself to walk, like walking, I walk all the time during the school
Yeah.
day, right? I could count
Yeah,
that, but
for sure.
focusing on it having to be outside and at home, it's been fun. My oldest son won't walk with me, but he gets some of his homework done when I get the rambunctious twins out of the house. But the twins are just telling me all about their day and like engaging with it. So it's that intentional time I don't usually make time for.
It
So
must be
that
hard
part's
during
been
those
good.
brutal Texas winters, of course.
Hey, we did have like some teens and 20s with really high winds, and
Yeah.
they would not
Oh.
go outside with me during those days. I had to do that myself. But
I would imagine it must have been awful, the terrible winters that Texas offers. I don't think you can
mhm.
compare it to the like 60 inches of snow that we received in the last 3 weeks, where you can't even see outside of your homes at this point here in Montreal. We're finally starting to have some of that melt away. It was a brutal couple of weeks here for for us. So our school never closes. You can imagine Canadian schools don't
Yeah.
exactly shut down for snowstorms. It's not like we see snow outside and they close the school because we'd have to close every day. So it's very rare that we have any type of snow day. And 2 weeks ago, we had 2 snow days in a row. So for
Mhm.
us, this is like we've just used up our quota of snow days for the next decade.
Yeah.
It's not normal for us. Our kids and staff could not believe it. There was, rejoicing in God giving them these great snowstorms that they had been looking for. But yeah, this was a strange couple of weeks weather-wise here in Canada.
I remember that from college in the Midwest that they would close for nothing except one finals week. They had to close because it was almost blizzard conditions and the professors couldn't get to campus to administer the finals. So
Yeah,
we were all there. We're stuck in our dorms, but we were like, okay, we get a day off, but then everyone had to change their flights home and stuff. So
yeah.
yeah, I think my skin was never really thicked up while I was there for that winter, but it's definitely thinner now. So
Something that's come to mind in the last week or so, that I've been reading up on and trying to keep on top of is just, hearing obviously about the Holy Father's health the last little
mm,
while. Something that's, concerning, I think, for any Jesuit institution for sure, but Catholics around the world are concerned about his health. So that's something I think is important for us to keep in mind and in our prayers for everybody who's listening, but also in our schools.
mhm.
Strong man, that's for sure. A guy who's seems to be fighting this off, but obviously worried about his health. I think it's been such a nice few years for Jesuit institutions. I think they became, not that they're not recognized, but I thought the Pope's obviously his profile has raised some of the profile of Jesuit institutions again, and to see him struggling and in poor health, I think is such a sad situation for the church because he's made huge strides in being more open and caring and compassionate towards people of all different groups and walks of life. So just something that's been on my mind and in my prayers the last little while.
Yeah, we had a rosary in our prayer garden yesterday for the Pope, and many students and faculty gathered to do so. And it's interesting when I think about how much he does in his mid to late 80s. And I've had a couple conversations with colleagues or former colleagues who are in their 70s, 80s, and they explain that their time of doing the big work, right? And kind of fighting for different things and engaging stuff that now they're the mentors and guides, and that we're at the age where it's like
Yeah.
we're supposed to be doing that work. And so I think about that whenever I think about how devastating I feel it would be for Pope Francis to pass away right now, but also because so many of us will have to take up the mantle of his work. If we believe in it, we have to really be willing to do something about it. And that's somewhat daunting, right? To know that our age group is like in the throes of being the ones to, like you said, make pace of the Canadian province. Like it's your time to kind of work on things of that nature, right? And what does that mean? It's both great to be entrusted with that work, or great to know that that is the work of our generation or whatever right now, but it's also really, really daunting.
Yeah. It's an interesting conversation. I don't know how often you've had discussions with Jesuits or priests in your life about the concept of death and dying. But every time I have those conversations and it comes up in discussion, they'll often talk about priests saying, well, we're ready for this. Like this is what
Mhm.
we've been waiting for. We've worked our lives and there's no fear in
Mhm.
this death, this physical death. Our whole life's work has been dedicated to that moment. And it came to mind last week. I received a text from my mom last week at some point to remind me of the anniversary of Father Eric McLean, who is a Jesuit here at Loyola High School, who passed away. I think it's 17 years ago. I can check after, but I believe it was the 17-year anniversary of his death. He was the president here at Loyola High School, and just a beloved person. Um, we still talk about his death all these years later
Mhm.
in terms of the sadness that it brought to the community. But at the same time, I also think so many of our staff members, teachers, administrators, priests that work here were formed in his style of leadership and faith. And it's had a long lasting impact on the people that worked here. And as you beautifully pointed out, we at Jesuit schools and in any type of Jesuit apostolate have to keep in mind that as Pope Francis gets closer to death, unfortunately, we have to, like you said, pick up that mantle and continue the amazing work that he's done. And if we can do that, I think he would probably himself say that it was a successful and worthwhile life
Mhm.
that he lived, and a long one as well.
Yeah, it seems his intention throughout his papacy, especially with the synod process, is to empower the church to be the church, to do the things that are a part of our faith, to work for social justice, to work for each other, to build each other up, to be more of a community, and to really engage with the difficult problems of the times
Yeah.
and not shy away from them.
You're right. I think one of the greatest qualities that he's shown during his papacy is an unrelenting spirit in the face of challenge and
Mhm.
criticism. Like
Mhm.
what an example for anybody who is working towards what they believe is their mission or their call, despite people constantly criticizing his way of doing things and his messaging. I felt he was always willing to take on that criticism and face it with integrity and grace. You never
Mhm.
saw him show bitterness or anger. It was always met with compassion and an educational conversation. And
Mhm.
that for me, I think he was really living out his Jesuit spirit in that moment. Every difficult conversation seemed like it was an educational experience. And
Mhm.
and for me, if we can take something away from his papacy, that would be the thing I'd want to take away from it.
Yeah. Well, and as we're recording, Pope Francis is resting comfortably, as the Vatican said, and is doing fine.
Yeah,
Hopefully, that is still
yeah.
true when I publish this
Despite some
episode.
confusing tweets, right?
Oh
Yeah,
my
the
gosh, so
confusing tweets
much.
that came out where you read them and you're going, well, wait a second, what's happening here? That's been a hot topic on the internet the last week or so. Why these tweets can't be written very clearly so that we know he's resting and well is
Probably
definitely
because they're speaking to the world and we all don't speak the same language or have
yeah,
the same way of proceeding. But
yeah,
yeah, yeah, it's been a good distraction from other newses. So, well, and I think some good highlights of good work continued will be in this conversation on this episode today. Both Bob and Anne, I remember as we were recording, just really feeling the spirit present in the room through our conversation. And then I was listening back to it to make sure the audio and everything worked. And I was just drawn in again to the conversation, to the hope that was present. Their experience was devastating to be in LA during the time of these fires, but the learnings that have come from it, but the strengthening of their faith and their understanding too of how that fits into traumas that everyone experiences at different levels. It was just great, impactful conversation to have at this time, where I think a lot of people tuning in are going to have bring their own struggles and their own traumas to the table and want to know, like, what do I do with this? What do I do with what's happening in the world, in my life, in my country, and how do I see this Jesuit community that we have as a place of hope and a place of good work ahead.
And I was obviously wasn't there for the interview. I'm sad that I missed out on it. But I had actually spoken to Bob and Ann in a prior meeting that you were in a couple of weeks ago as well. And just to hear them talk about the great sadness that came from this, but also how much it brought their community together in a time of need. And sometimes in these moments of tragedy, to see communities feel strengthened, their bonds are strengthened by these difficult situations, and how people are able to respond in a positive way where they think beyond themselves, despite these horrible things that are happening to them personally. Bob and Ann both described people in their own communities focusing on the others and what they could give to people around them that were struggling. So, they're both such incredible colleagues. They're so wise, and the years of experience that Bob and Ann have. I always appreciate those conversations with them. So I'm sad that I missed the interview, but I know the conversation you had with them was a great one and a really worthwhile experience for our listeners, I hope.
Yeah, I think they're really going to love it. So let's tune in to Bob and Ann. Welcome, Bob and Ann. I'm so excited to have this conversation with you today. Thank you for coming on the podcast. I know we all share a love of spiritual formation, particularly of adults who in turn serve our students. And I'm so grateful that we get a chance to engage in a conversation like this one. We get to engage in them frequently, but that we get to engage with them and then share that with a larger audience in this podcast episode. So welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for inviting
Great,
us.
great to be here. Thank you.
I know we're recording at the end of a busy school day. Is there any moment of gratitude from today that you can pinpoint as you're kind of switching your brain from the day and then into this conversation?
At lunch, I was walking out to try and meet with a couple of different people, and they weren't there, so I ended up just standing in our commons area for a moment. And as for us, our students are out eating outside, kind of interacting with one another, and we're blessed that it was a nice sunny day here. I just stood in the sun and kind of enjoyed all the activity of the moment and the kind of sense of the goodness of it all. And I was grateful for that. It was I don't always have that kind of moment where I'm just out there, just kind of taking in all the activity that is a regular part of our everyday school day. But today it felt a little special.
Wonderful.
That's really nice. Actually, right before we came in to this session, we were in a conversation, and we were kind of, I'll say, gathering the graces of our faculty staff retreat. And we had the tremendous gift of having Father Greg Boyle with us for our faculty day this year. And I think you'll probably appreciate this, that oftentimes when we go into faculty staff days, there are varying levels of enthusiasm, right, for coming together. And I think I can really, with full sort of integrity and honesty, say that we had just a glorious sense of participation this year in a way that so rarely happens. Folks were they felt so blessed by having Greg with us. And even those who sometimes are reluctant, just really, to use the phrase, literally leaned in. Like there was physical presence in a way that was just palpable and really beautiful. And I think we're still feeling some of the goodness of that time together. So, and we had just been talking about that, as I said, right before we came in.
Oh, that's wonderful. I just purchased his new book, Cherished Belonging. Looking
Uh-huh.
forward to diving into that in Lent. Particularly grateful that he's still writing for, the times that we're in and the experiences that we have. I don't know if that came up in his presentation with the faculty or not.
Well, we gave his book we were lucky enough to be able to provide his book for everyone, and
Oh,
he did
nice.
take some time to sign. And he tends to sign at least this book with the greeting of love never fails,
Hmm.
and stands and talks with folks and is so fully present to each person as they come up to him, and he signs the book and all of that. And I've noticed folks walking around with it, so it is yet another extension of that gift. It's really great.
Yeah, that's great. We have a weekly school-wide prayer service, and we had one today. And so my moment of gratitude today was just seeing teenage boys get up and talk about responsible economics. They are very excited about business and economics, and they talk about that in a club that they have, but they were talking about what it means for them to really invest their time and energy and their money in things that matter, and how they are already thinking about that now and that they hope to think about that in the future. It was just really awesome whenever you can learn from a teenage boy, right, about, something else that you connect with. And I saw a lot of faculty going up afterwards and shaking hands of all the boys that participated in it. So it's just a real great moment of God when they can show us of that future that is ahead, right? That those good hearts and those good spirits forming within them.
Yeah. Gives you hope, gives one hope,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Yeah. In this Jubilee year of hope, where we are focusing on right now the hope that Pope Francis is going to be well, and praying for him. But I know he has spoken much about hope, and that's really what our conversation is about today. I know that 2025, we may all be able to agree, did not start exactly the way we thought it would for any of us for a variety of reasons, but really specifically for you all and your school community. Can you bring our listeners into the experience of the first couple of months of 2025? Tell us what that was like for you all.
You know, the wildfires here in the greater Los Angeles area certainly impacted us greatly. We have a widespread community here at Loyola High School. We cover, 200 zip codes in the greater Los Angeles area, and many, many families in both the fires were affected to the extent that we have about 60 families of current 60 households, really. Some have more than one student in them who lost their homes completely, and then about another 100 people who were displaced. And in addition, there were a couple of staff members who also lost their homes. Personally, our son and his family lost their home. So, though I am not directly impacted, certainly on the front lines, feeling a lot of the effects of things. And that's sort of the statistical reality around it. And I will give another thought, and then I'll let Bob do some talking about it, and we'll come back and forth a little bit on this. But the response has been what has been for me so humbling, and is the aspect of things that actually will bring me to tears more than, say, the other realities of the situation, just because the generosity has been so astounding and the kindness of people. Our community responded almost immediately with setting up a mutual aid center here on campus, and just the way that families, students, faculty, and staff responded. And then the greater, and we can talk about this a little more as we go forward, but the network, the Jesuit network, was just and continues to be so generous and thoughtful and caring toward us.
You know, for people that don't live in other places, Southern California is very dry, deserty kind of, place. And there are fires on a somewhat regular basis that occur here. But and there's been some devastating fires in California, over the years. Um, Living in Los Angeles, you'll hear reports, or there'll be areas, particularly like let's say a little bit further north, Malibu or some others, some of the canyon areas that um, you kind of know are more prone to, let's say, that's fire conditions, a little bit more isolated, right? And the winds will pick up around this time of year in kind of a predictable way. It's dry and there's that kind of danger that's out there. But for me, at least, you know, uh, going into those school days, it just was kind of a normal time, right? There wasn't really around me much awareness. Oh, sure, there's warnings or there's alerts um, but we're just at school, just doing our thing. Okay, high winds, things like that. And then it was, uh, over the loudspeaker, I guess was kind of my first uh, where it really got tuned in. And if you're from a distance, a loudspeaker can kind of be a little mumbled. You're not sure exactly what you're hearing, right? But it sounded like there was some announcement for students from the Palisades needed to come to the front office or something like that, right? And it was only later that I learned that they were brought and then dismissed because the Palisades fire had already started. And there was, uh, a need for families to already start moving. Um, and it still seemed kind of removed, I think at that point. Okay, fire, who knows what that means, right? I think you hear there might be a fire, fires happen, etc. I had no sense of the scale of it through that school day, really. I was kind of going about my business, not, there's not a TV in my office, so I was tuned into or anything. And so it was only kind of later, it was kind of a gradual, all that to say, it was kind of a gradual build in a sense, for me at least, of the significance of the event. And then there's other fires starting, right? And um, the impact in multiple places. And then you knew that something kind of very different was happening, right? In some ways, I guess there's echoes, and there's multiple echoes to our experience with COVID,
Mhm.
right? A few days before everything happened, we're all gathered together, faculty and staff, right? And they're making announcements about this thing. And basically the feeling is like, okay, it's not gonna be that bad, or
Mhm.
okay, it's a little bumpy, right? And then like a couple days later, we're just teaching remotely. Right? And the same, right? You go home that day thinking, okay, this is serious. People have been dismissed. There's fires, right? And the next thing you know, like, okay, we're not coming back to school because the conditions are just so bad and the fires are spreading so much. One of the things that's, I think, for me in the experience is the way that these fires were so close to the kind of concentrated hub of the population centers, right? Which made it different than some of the other fires that people might see or hear about in our area. There are other places in California have been hit in real population centers, but for me and us, I think in Southern California, this one really just was so devastating because of the way it just swept into pretty densely populated areas and just destroyed, uh, so many structures and homes and displaced people. And the smoke and the impact just spread everywhere.
Mhm.
So it was very much, I mean, I think if people are wondering a little bit like what was the sense, what did it feel like? I think about what it was like in that lead up to COVID, right? Where you're like, is this bad? What is this? And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, okay, this is a whole different
Mhm.
level. And that is at least how I kind of experienced that beginning part of the fires here.
I'm going to go back to that day a little bit with Bob just because um, I almost naively just stayed at work the way I always stay at work that
Mhm.
day and was finishing some things up. and got outside, and the winds were they were blowing, but as Bob said, we're pretty accustomed to those, and seasonally the Santa Ana winds and that sort of thing. I happen to live up in the area where the Eaton fire took place, and I got off the freeway and was like, oh, wow. I mean, you could see the glow already. The winds were blowing and such, and it was already kind of surreal in the ways that things were shifting as quickly as they are. And it's still, honestly, I wasn't sure what I was supposed to do. And I think that I got home, and my husband was already home, thank goodness, and we made the decision to leave pretty quickly. But the our son, who lives in a different portion of the city, I called him, and he's the one whose home was destroyed. When I called him and said that his dad and I were going to go ahead and evacuate, we were a little bit ahead of the official call that we got. He was like, "Oh, Mom, we're fine. We're on the other side of town. It's not going to hit." And I bring that up just as sort of a correlation to what Bob was talking about, in that it really was something so different than what we've experienced historically here in the greater Los Angeles area. And the fact that it was in as much of the urban setting as it was, it's usually up in the hills or the the valleys and different places that are a little bit more remote. And honestly, I think we're still and will continue to grapple with what that means. There was a group of students and their adult chaperones here from Fairfield Prep last week. And one of the young men said to me, as he was asking me some questions about what it was like and that sort of thing, and just trying to wrap their heads around the expanse of what Los Angeles looks like as in terms of being a city and the expanse there. And he said, "Yeah, my mom was trying to explain to me how far and wide these fires extended." And he said, I can't wrap my head around it. It doesn't make sense to me that something could be that large. So those are the kinds of things we're all still, I think, processing, and certainly our students are as well. So it's been big. It's been really big.
I appreciate the comparison to what we all experienced at COVID. I remember having faculty and staff meetings of like, well, we're supposed to remind ourselves how to wash our hands, but it was kind of like, what are we getting ourselves into? But it made me think of my first couple years of teaching in Louisiana, because we would have a lot of hurricane days off, and it got to be one of these, well, these always happen, but it always fizzles out by the time it gets in, and we're going to have a day off, and the students would be excited, we're going to have a day off, and it'll all fizzle out. And I taught there from 2002 to 2004, and I just remember knowing when Katrina hit that, oh, that same kind of, oh, it's going to fizzle out. And this is what we always have year to year. And this is what, it happens, but we're used to it. And then it wasn't, and it was in densely populated areas, and it was, a rapid just change of life. And that's what came to mind for me. I was out of Baton Rouge, Louisiana at that time, but my students back there, were communicating with me, and just kind of that change of mindset, that quick change of mindsets is so difficult to make, because you're used to kind of dismissing some of those warnings and those things that come up.
Folks actually have called it our Katrina. That's something that some people have been saying. Yeah.
And in a way, some things never went back to what they were from Katrina, but so much has been able to grow and change and rebuild. And so it's always edifying to me to see those examples of rebuilding, even though it takes a long time to be able to say, oh, I've seen the hope in this. I don't know if that resonates with you all or not.
I think one of the things that was so clear at the beginning, and I'd say to some extent still is just the shock. And as we've been discussing, right, how much, you're kind of used to things going a certain way, or like these things, the alerts being there, but it not happening, right? And when it does, uh, a little bit like Anne was talking about with regard to that student, is just hard to comprehend, right? The brain can't take it all in. And when you think about the loss, right, you think about losing your home, losing everything you have, right? For those of us that haven't been directly impacted in that way, but know people that have, it's just hard for us to take it in, right? And so you can't even imagine for the people that have. And then, the ongoing reality that people, I just had having a conversation a few weeks ago with a colleague. I didn't know they, you know, just that awareness like of not knowing how people have been impacted, right? And very much in that week after, just asking people like, well, where do you live? Were you impacted? Because you just don't know, right? Or if
Mhm.
they were, who was? And this colleague saying, I didn't lose my home, but I was like right next to it, so I haven't been able to go back. Right? I won't be able to go back for months. And just the awareness of that, the layers of the uh, difficulty, the challenge that is just hard to take in. A couple of days ago, talking with people, well, it'll probably take about a year to clean everything up, right, before anything can happen, and then there'll be all the environmental and just
Mhm.
you're just like, wow, how shock, right? What do you do with all that kind of information in a way and that awareness? And I think we feel a lot of also, I'd say, and this played into our faculty staff retreat that we had, as Anne was mentioning a few weeks ago. God, we had an awareness that people are just a lot of different places.
Mhm.
And so we intentionally structured it so there wouldn't be a lot of kind of small group time. There would be more just individual time and one-to-one time, so that people didn't feel the need to kind of, some people might want to talk about it and find it very helpful. Other people might not want to share or talk, right? And I think this just that awareness too of the variety of people's experiences and the different ways that people process things or want to process
Mhm.
it, right? Some people want a lot of external support. Other people just don't. Um, yeah, that's been so heightened for me, right? I think the hope that I've seen and kind of Anne was talking about this before was in that outpouring of support that's come, right? And that kind of uh, confidence among the community that uh, the most important things haven't been lost in a way,
Mhm.
right? And that people can come together and be supportive of one another in that sense, even though there were quite tragic losses of life. Um, that there is that if we look to the places of hope where I've seen them, they've been in those kind of coming together in the face of uh, such difficult times without any sense of what will come in the future, a confidence that rebuilding will happen, but more just that of gratitude for being here and for being a community together, are some of the things I think that I've seen and experienced.
I think one of the things also that was very interesting in the immediate aftermath was this sort of call to action, that folks really wanted and needed to do something for their friends and colleagues and even strangers who they didn't know. What was also compelling was we literally had to tell people, please don't bring any more clothes.
Mhm.
Please, we are overwhelmed. And what I saw in even my own family, but among colleagues, was we don't have anywhere to put the things that you're so generously giving to us. Yes, we need immediate things. I mean, many people left. Some people couldn't even get back into their homes to take anything with them, right? So you have all these levels of what has been lost or what is not. But it was I'm still kind of really processing that sense of, first of all, an awareness of abundance because there was such
Mhm.
generosity. And then how I hope this comes across the right way, that even that sometimes that abundance is an overwhelming, reality too, right? And it kind of segues into the conversations that around this idea of rebuilding and working through the idea that whatever it is we rebuild will not replicate what was, but will be something new, and I think there's a lot to grapple with that in terms of reflection and prayer and sensibilities about what it is to go forward after any tragedy, really, right? Anything that is an upheaval in life, we're reoriented into seeing things in new ways, experiencing things in new ways. I'm seeing the realities of grief play out. That numbness that Bob's talking about is still very real in certain places, but the anger is starting to bubble up for a lot of folks, and especially in children. Because the littles don't know how to process all the things that they're feeling. I heard a story about a child whose parents said, "Oh, it's time to go home now," and it set the little guy off. He's like, "I don't have a home," and just they don't have much more word than that, right? So, not to get caught in staying in that space, but honoring that's how that person, and especially those younger people who don't have maybe the tools to, but even adults, it's that uncharted territory of. So I think community really does and has helped a lot of people, whether it's in the silence of companionship and not talking about it, but being there, as well as then letting people process as well. So yeah, it's there are many things for us to learn about our own humanity in this process.
I'll just add on to that, I think again the experience of COVID came back very strongly in a negative way for a lot of people, right? I think that so, Los Angeles is a vast city. There's many, many people that were not anywhere near, the fires. And yet I think at least our school community, because members of our community were directly impacted, what I saw here was just so, everyone was affected in one way or another. And for some people, I think it was a manifestation of that experience of those, that experience of COVID, which was so difficult. And when we're teaching online, we weren't teaching online, but when you're back online or you're wearing a mask because of the smoke and everything, and there were these things like, oh, the streets are quiet. All of the things there reminded me of just how much there is still from that previous experience that remains unprocessed for us here, and I'm sure for people everywhere. And so that's just another element, another layer, I think, to what's come up for us here in processing and kind of addressing this more recent experience with the fires.
Yeah, you both remind me of not only the stages of grief, but also that grief can compound on top of grief when you haven't fully processed the last thing, the last moment, the last person you lost, the last situation that you were in. And a lot of us in COVID were just so excited to not be in COVID that I think we didn't go back and process and think about all of the trauma and all of the unsettledness that is still within us, that we still see in our relationships that have changed profoundly because of some gotten closer, but some not because of that situation. So to be reminded of the fact that, hey, we probably still have some work to do on processing that grief, so that when, much like, we talk about Ignatian spirituality and consolation, you plan for moments of desolation. How often are we really reflecting on, are we in a place that can handle something else? And then it seems like every day there's something else to compound our grief. So it's just, you really bring that to mind, and to be aware that grief is compounding in other people, even ones that you work with all the time. You may not know what's happening in their homes, what's happening in their own family members who may live in LA or other places that have had these impacts. So
another I'm probably being very revealing about how my mind and heart work with some of the things that I'm sharing here, but we were displaced only for about 10 days, and I kept thinking about that we were in a safe spot, we were with family, and yet we've had this sense of being out of our home and displaced. And I just kept thinking about, if I feel this way in this relatively safe situation, what must this feel like for others who maybe lose their homeland? I mean, I got a little extreme in it for a while in terms of just extrapolating the sensibilities, but it felt so palpable to me. Oh, this is what that might feel like, and a lot of conversations that folks really are so well intended, and it's true. We come back to the loss of life was fairly minimal compared to what it could have been. Still, life was lost, and many things were lost, sensibilities of loss. And one of the conversations I had just yesterday was the difference in sensibilities around the transience of life that come maybe from the Eastern religions. And so it's led to some really interesting conversations about attachments, about, what it means to own land. I mean, all these different opportunities, is what I'm getting to, have come from a catastrophic experience, but they've led to some really meaningful exchanges with folks either who have been directly affected or who are trying to understand some of it. So it's again the mysteries of how we end up encountering one another in ways that we would never have anticipated. So trying to reflect on that in a sort of daily way in terms of, well, what happened today where I actually learned something new in that, as much as we gather graces and gratitude, there was also like, I feel like I'm just being stretched. As is our community, just the things. When I think of in those first weeks, especially the intensity of what our counseling department was doing for and with students and families and such, and the ongoingness of that for some of our students. For others, it's been so like school is where they feel like they're in their own skin, and things are really matching up well. And then others are like, I don't know where I belong. Mm-hmm. Every iteration in between, kind of. So much to think about the condition of being human.
Yeah. It reminds us of the great myriad of ways that people experience something, that we all experience it differently. I know it's been the topic of conversation over the years of like how one should grieve or how one should experience a traumatic moment, and what is the way that we expect people to experience something. And it's never really that in practice, right? When it happens to us, all sorts of reactions come to the surface and again show us that that complexity. But I also like what you said, Anne, about what your experience opened your mind to about what it means to lose your homeland, or what it means to be someone that is, a migrant, a refugee, somebody that is seeking a new land and all the hardships with that, but not having that community around you when you're experiencing those hardships. Definitely something to think about. And even if it's not our own experience, like how might we grow in empathy for one another?
Very much so.
Y'all remarked about the significance of being a part of a Jesuit community, being part of the Jesuit network. What ways has that really manifested for you, both in Ignatian spirituality, right, but also in being a part of this larger network of Jesuit schools?
Well, I think it was just very quickly people were reaching out to kind of see how we were doing, what's happening. And it's always also a indicator a little bit of how things are being, reported in the news, right? The level. This was definitely being reported at a high level, and I could tell that because people from across, here in the United States or Canada, Jesuit Schools Network reached out, and then some other people that I work with through Educate Magis and Ireland or Malta were kind of asking me and emailing me.
Texting you in
And
an early morning because you forget
Yeah.
about time zones. I might have done
yes,
that a
right.
couple
There's just kind
times.
of like just yeah. So uh there is a sense of, I mean, it's not a sense, there is a connection that we share, right? As Jesuit schools, as people in the same tradition. And there's a sense that what I felt from others is what you're experiencing, I'm experiencing in some way. And I want to then followed quickly with that is I want to do something to help, right? And there was certainly from several schools that or people at schools that were reached out to me. And then I know many of my colleagues the same from people they knew, people asking, what can we do? How can we help? Concretely, for example, Anne mentioned we just had the Fairfield prep students visiting, and Elliot, who does the mission work there, reached out to me, and then they ended up doing a collection for people here as a result that was impacted by the fires, and so it all just kind of moved quickly in terms of that sense of support, both in terms of prayers and then action. I think in whatever ways people were able to define ways to act in a way that was helpful.
One of the hallways upstairs is full of greeting cards that were made by students in another school, and so um, it it also has me thinking about how I think we lose ourselves very easily when we really see like catastrophic need, or like when it's palpable and we can sort of see what's there. And I think you alluded to this a little bit already, Gretchen, like kind of that assumption that all people are carrying something, that everyone has their, so the daily challenges rise and ebb and flow in terms of size, immensity, intensity, and such, and how cultivating that spirit of just more awareness, deeper awareness of just go gently, and I've really been moved by some of the way that Greg Boyle uses this idea of tenderness. And I'm seeing all over social media, many things, but I'm going to focus on is the call to kindness. And like, would it be that simple, that we could really consistently tap into knowing that one another, it is the assumption of goodwill on many levels, but in the day to day, how we can easily forget that as we're moving through or driving the freeways of Southern California or whatever it is, um, it has it has both softened my heart and also, I don't know if this is the right way to say it, but I kind of also feel a little more resilient and a little bit tougher on some levels, because when something's so big, you really have to dig deep to just keep going, and to keep putting one foot in front of another. So, and throughout, prayer has both been helpful and agitating, so it's it's bringing things up, even just having this opportunity to speak with you today. I'm really grateful for that.
You remind me of a quote that I don't fully remember right now, but Greg Boyle talks about in Tattoos of the Heart, the expansive heart of God. And I think in times of really large events, large destructive events, we can feel like our needs for God might be too small, or our situation might not be as necessary for God's attention and everybody else's attention as this event is. And so the more that we can help people see that God has enough room for all of it, right? And that we also have a big enough heart for all of it, right? To both care for our colleagues, our neighbors, our friends in LA, but also to have an expansive enough heart to care for all of the people that are suffering with something right now and that need our prayers and our attention and our kindness.
He also got a good laugh when he talked about the exhausted God, which is a whole nother chapter. We can explore that another day.
I'm teaching a course on Jesuit history and making the students do presentations on Jesuit saints and blesseds. And it's funny because it's like, here's another one that died from exhaustion, and here's another one that died from illness. And I was like, well, Ignatius said not to exhaust ourselves. He was very clear. And a Jesuit who came to class joked, I think it's just because he wanted more work out of us. And I was like, okay. But we, God can get exhausted, but maybe also knowing that ourselves, giving ourselves that grace of knowing when we have to just take care of ourselves and be compassionate with ourselves in order to then serve others well.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about how the immediate response to something like this is overwhelming, right? More clothes than you can find places for them to go. What are the needs that come after, like the ones that are kind of happening right now that maybe our listeners, other people around the network can be attuned to now, months down the road, ways of continuing to offer compassion, help, connection, all of those things.
One thing that this isn't exactly on what you're saying, specifically to our community necessarily, but it's something I was thinking about earlier. And is another piece, I think, of this that speaks to or impacts all of us. The Jesuits West, that's our province on the West Coast, was having a gathering around people that do work for environmental justice, care for our common home, things like that. And the Sarah Retreat House, the Franciscan Retreat House in Malibu, right? And they had to evacuate as a result of the fires there. And they had to, drive out past the fires. And I saw some video of that. I wasn't part of that gathering myself, but some of the people who wrote along the topics that experience of being gathered to care for our common home at the same time that the world was on fire, right? That the earth is suffering, that there are these impacts that are there, both in the realities just of kind of what we experienced here, which is a combination of natural realities and other impacts, but just that fact that our world is not doing that well in a lot of ways, that there is a need for care that Pope Francis has spoken about so strongly, that the Jesuit network is committed to through the Universal Apostolic Preferences. And so on that sense, the work is for all of us in terms of when we think about the environment, when we think about the earth and our common home, right? It is a particular type of natural disaster that we experienced here in Los Angeles, but wherever you live in the world, there's a need to be, more cognizant than we have been in the past about the realities of our environment. And that's one thing that I would highlight for everyone in our Jesuit network.
Well, and allowing ourselves to be so moved by the stories of our colleagues and friends that were moved to action and long-lasting action, not to be so moved by the immediate needs only, as we talk about in Catholic social teaching, those 2 feet of justice, charity and justice, meeting the immediate needs of people, but then working on what is the reason those needs happened in the first place. I signed up for Teaching Tuesdays with Fred Kammer, SJ. It's an international offering where they will send emails every Tuesday, and there's a couple like collective gatherings throughout the next year about social justice. And the first email came today, and it kind of gave some introductory things about Catholic social teaching, but then it said like, for more, dive into Laudate Deum. So the second part that Pope Francis wrote to Laudato Si, where he sounded a lot angrier, but he also was very more direct, saying, I wrote this many years ago, and this is still happening, and these are still the situations that exist. So reading that, diving into what is the global picture, and then figuring out how we help not only our immediate communities in North America, but how do we look at the global picture and let stories move us to action?
I think the other it's a tangent to what you both have said already. In our just electrifyingly fast-paced world, it's easy perhaps to forget instead of taking the lessons with us, right? And not to harbor or to wallow in all of it, but to remember some of those palpable, really lessons that do change our hearts, right? And so I think it is, no matter what we're looking at in terms of issues, they tend to make more sense when we have some encounter, right? They take hold in us because we've had an encounter with this. And even as Bob already said earlier, we were very aware going into our faculty and staff retreat that we had this, proportionately large number of folks who were living with this high level of devastation and loss. And there were also people who the week before had been on these magnificent immersion trips and had been in Italy and had been, scuba diving off the shores of Mexico and like had this whole other experience of life. And all those folks were coming into the same room to then have this shared experience as this community. And I've wondered at this kind of reality for probably much of my adult life and awareness in ministry and in communities of any nature, that when we're hoping to create common, I'll say, goals or common, that sense that this is our common home, right? I think acknowledging that we come at this from such different perspectives, and it's such an epitome of the I'll say the divided interpretations of life writ large these days that we're living in the United States of America and really globally. I think there's such a divide, right? And one of the challenges I feel is this sense that it can be so overwhelming to look at those really big issues that are so real and feel that I can make meaningful difference in the circles of my life, or maybe beyond the circles in the ways that I'm able to stretch, but giving that as much effort as I possibly can where I can sway influence. And if all of us did that, what a difference that would make. And so how do we continue to convey that to the persons with whom we minister, who we have some sway of influence with, in whether it's in our work or even our families and our neighborhoods and such too, because I think it can be really overwhelming to think about the meta implications of climate change, right? And so how are we addressing it where we can to make a difference?
To not be so overwhelmed that we stand still. But
Yeah.
I like what you said about not forgetting the lessons. During COVID, we learned the lesson of slowing down and less things. And I think that we're like right back where we started with before that, because we forgot that lesson, right? Like we were so excited to get back into life. So yeah, what are those ways that we continue to take the lessons of the past, both our immediate past and even our historical past, and use those to make a difference in our futures? This has been such an incredible conversation, and I am aware both of your time and the time of our listeners. But JP and I, even though we've only had a couple guests, we are going to have more guests. We're working on it. But we had questions that we designed a while ago, like, what would you ask? What would you ask? Like any great podcaster. So my question was just like a lighthearted, quick answer. But if you could travel back in time to 1540 and ask Ignatius just one question, what would it be?
I think when think about that, one thing I'm always interested in for, like in interacting and talking with people is kind of like what's one of the key pieces, like insights or like wisdom that guides your life, right? And I think Ignatius had a ton, right? So many different things. But what would he say? Like if he had like what was the most important for him? Like what was and maybe it was the examen. I don't know. Maybe it was, his prayers at his mass, or who knows. But what was it? Like what was the thing or the insight about consolation or desolation, or the rule? If he had to pick one of the rules for discernment of spirit, which was the one most important to him and it guided his life? I'd be curious.
Now that he's had 500 years to reflect on it, his answer may be
Yes.
different.
And he would probably say, well, it depends on the situation, the
Depends
context.
on the century.
But
it's funny when you think about going back and speaking with folks, historical figures, if you will. We'll talk about it in that way right now. And I always want to sort of have a sensory experience of what it was like to be in their time and place. And I'm attracted to the River Cardonere. There's something about that scene and that imagery that has always sort of intrigued me. So I'd want him to tell me about it. I'd want him to describe it to me. And I think words fail oftentimes when we have these profound experiences. So give me more, like that kind of a thing. So if I could say the word Cardonere, it would be
and yeah, that like one such profound moment. How do you put that in words and have someone else experience it too?
Yeah. Sort of something to, yeah.
And even though JP couldn't be on this call, though we'll talk about it afterwards, his question is, at what point did you feel that your call to working in a Jesuit education was so clear that you could no longer deny it? Not that you necessarily had a River Cardinere moment.
For me, this isn't, it wouldn't be exactly, I don't know, for Jesuit education, but like this spiritual exercises for me are just like such a key thing. And for me, when I made them, I think, and it wasn't just them, it was other elements of kind of Jesuit formation and insight, but they open a door to an understanding of how we are loved in our weakness and brokenness and yet called to serve, and that I think it freed me in a way that set me on the trajectory that I've been on. And my work in directing other people, there's nothing I do that matches that in terms of the transformation I see that people can experience, and that sense of freedom to be who God has called them to be. So for me, that's kind of that's the anchor. consistently.
Try to be concise about what could be a very long story here. It's only in adult perspective and reflection that I realize the seeds of my, I'll say, Ignatian Jesuit attachment, or I'll say attachment, but um, that encounter was something that was coming in my life when I was a small child, because my father had been Jesuit educated, and his worldview, the way he approached really what is discernment. He wasn't using those words, but his way of proceeding in his life was already taking hold in my life. And I say often, and have said often, that if anyone had told me, even as a very young adult, that I would be working in Jesuit education, I would have been very surprised. And then, even as I had made the spiritual exercises, the idea of working in Jesuit education was not on my radar. I was very happily working in an all-girls school in a different charism, and all that sort of thing. And so what I have lightly, I guess I'll use the word, say, is that I feel like I've been part of a conspiracy of belonging ever since I said the first yes to coming into to living what I already knew. So even when I was teaching in this other charism, my colleagues would tease me about, you're actually an Ignatius, and I'll leave it blank in terms of the other charism, but you're an Ignatian such and such educator. You can see it in the way that you do things and the way that you proceed. And you know, the ongoing yes has really truly been ongoing, because I see that I'm echoing some of what Bob said, but that idea that even with all that is real in my life, I know that God is very actively calling me toward generosity and sharing the gifts that I've been given. And that's foundational, and it's helpful, and it's a life source, so I don't know if it was like one compelling moment of, wow, I really knew it and I just had to dig in, because in honesty, I've looked at other opportunities, just circumstantially for different reasons, and then that conspiracy kicks in, and, and like, no, this is where this is where I belong. It makes the most sense. And the opportunities that we have to encounter the divine within one another are they're not always profound in the way of like, oh wow, look what just happened, but they're profound in in the prayer that we attribute to Arupe. It's like it's what gets you up in the morning, that there's that energy. So even when one is a little bit tired, it is the life source. So it's a great question. Thank you.
No, and a wonderful answer, that intangible something that we have all experienced in people who have been Jesuit educated or in our own Jesuit colleagues, that just make us continue to want to be a part of the work and to dive deeper, for sure. Well, thank you so much, Bob and Ann, for coming on the podcast, for sharing your story with us. I'm sure this is not the last time that we will have a conversation with you, but it's so great to have made it happen. Thank you all so much for coming.
Thank you for the
Thank
opportunity.
you. Great to be with you. Thank you.
If you have like one point of gratitude and one grace desired for the upcoming weeks ahead, especially as we enter into the Lenten season.
I'll look at it as a point of desire and a call and an ask of God for the next couple of weeks as we head into the Lenten season. Is, for me, it's always a question of, at Lent, I'm not a huge believer in giving something up. That's not something I've always felt. I got a lot of when I look back and reflect, not a lot of growth came from giving something up. When I was younger, I would talk about giving up a food or a drink or whatever it was. I get that, but I actually think it's more the spirit of sacrifice that I'd like to ask for from God as we get closer into the Lenten season, and not giving up anything physical, but more being willing to sacrifice some of my own desires and happiness to help people in our own community. And I think that is inspired both by what we heard from Bob and Anne and what they've talked about recently. If we can all have a little bit more of that spirit, willing to sacrifice our own comfort and our own joy so that somebody else can gain something in their life, that would be the spirit that I'd ask for me personally. And I'd love that for that to be the spirit that comes into our community here at Loyola in the next little while. I think focusing on tangible things is nice and it's worthwhile, but at the same time, I think that spirit of sacrifice is what I would ask for from God for the next little while.
Yeah, one point of gratitude that just came to mind for me. We're recording this part of our conversation on February 28th, which is Rare Diseases Day, World Rare Diseases Day. And I just was scrolling Instagram this morning and remembered that this was this day. And it brought me back to being in the hospital in December 2022, being diagnosed with a rare disease, and just seeing where it's not front of mind for me anymore. It's something that I have to do daily to keep myself alive. I have to take steroids every day and, carry an emergency shot and have a medical alert bracelet and all of that. But just to be so grateful for not only the doctors that were able to diagnose me, because rare diseases are not easy to diagnose because you study them in medical school like a paragraph, maybe a day, but you don't really dive into them. And so some people, especially with the disease I have, the adrenal insufficiency, in certain countries cannot be diagnosed at all before suffering consequences, even to death. So I'm grateful for the doctors that were able to diagnose me, for the medications that are so far readily available to me where I live, and for my alma mater, the University of Notre Dame, that is making that one of the things they fight for. So we've talked about Notre Dame football before, but every football game, there's the commercial, like, what would you fight for? And this year it's fighting for rare diseases. And so they're really investing a lot of time and attention, particularly on ones that infants are not able to, reach beyond infancy because this disease is so debilitating. They're really focusing on how can we extend the lives of young children especially, but also anyone that suffers with, and a rare disease is like 1 in 100,000, right? So something that doesn't often get time and attention. So I'm grateful for the work being done, and the grace desired is that there is time, attention, money, work dedicated to not only rare diseases, but medical interventions for all in the future, because I've seen what an impact it can have in my own family's life. And it's just such an important thing. And I'm so grateful for the doctors that exist, that do this work and that do this study and that make these strides.
Yeah. I know oftentimes we hear, gratitude for doctors and medical professionals, but really it's all a lot of the work that we don't see that we need to be grateful for, as you said, the research and the time investment in people who are actively pursuing treatments and working towards finding cures and treatments for people who really need it, as you said, yourself, but also young people and people around the world. Again, so many just don't have access to these resources. So not just the people who are finding those solutions, but those who are fighting to provide those solutions for people around the world who may not actually have the opportunity at this moment to get those treatments, I just think is something that we need to be grateful for. And it fits in nicely to something you mentioned earlier about social justice and Jesuit institutions, how we need to continue to fight for people who don't have access to basic human needs, and bring attention to that constantly. It cannot be something that we forget, as we've talked about before, in that busyness of our own lives.
Yeah, and if a 80-plus-year-old man can travel across the world to do that, I guess we can probably do some of those things ourselves too.
Yeah.
Right?
We could invest a little bit of effort into it for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. He puts me to shame, really does. So Both JP and I are battling a bell about to ring, but we are going to be back very soon with another interview. But we look forward to continuing to bring these conversations to you because we think they matter so much. And we really would love to hear your thoughts about them. And if you want to be a guest on our podcast, please let us know. We would love to bring your story to life. Thank you for joining us today for our conversation. If you like this podcast and would like to hear more or help others find it, please subscribe and leave a review. To follow along and contribute to the conversation, as well as engage with the other resources offered, follow Living Ad Maiorem on Instagram and bookmark the website livingadmaiorem.org. Both links are in the show notes. This podcast and associated website are an offering of the Jesuit Schools Network and are supported by passionate educators throughout North America. So until next time, remember that your work living towards the greater matters. After all, it is how others see God alive in you.